I used to work the night shift at a small 3-story hotel with about 40 rooms total. It wasn't a busy place, usually only 10 to 15 rooms filled on weeknights. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most nights were dead quiet, which suited me just fine. I'd sit behind the reception desk, handle paperwork, occasionally check the security cameras, and sometimes watch videos on my phone when things got really slow. The lobby wasn't large, just the front desk, some lounge chairs positioned around a television, and vending machines humming in the corner. Behind the desk was a small office with a computer, chair, and glass window overlooking the lobby. At night, the front doors locked automatically, so guests had to buzz in and I'd press a button to let them through. Usually, nothing happened after midnight except the occasional late arrival, but one night, everything changed in a way that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. Around 11 p.m., a man buzzed the door. I let him in and he walked up to the desk. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, tall and somewhat thin, wearing jeans and a baseball cap, carrying a backpack. He asked if we had a room available for the night. I quoted him the price, he nodded, and pulled out a credit card. I swiped it, heard the approval beep, and handed him a key card for room 214 on the second floor. Something felt off about the interaction, though I couldn't pinpoint what exactly. He looked at me for several seconds too long after I gave him the key, this blank expression with eyes that seemed to study my face. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator without another word. I returned to my chair and scrolled through my phone for a while. Around midnight, I glanced up and nearly jumped out of my skin. He was back in the lobby, but he hadn't approached the desk. Instead, he'd walked past me and settled into one of the lounge chairs facing the television, which wasn't even turned on. I figured maybe he couldn't sleep. Some guests do hang out in the lobby sometimes. But after half an hour, I realized he was just sitting there doing absolutely nothing. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't reading, wasn't even dozing off. He was staring straight ahead at the blank screen with an intensity that made my skin crawl. At one point, I got up to grab water from the vending machine. As I walked across the lobby, I felt his head turn to follow my movement. I didn't look directly at him, but I could feel those eyes tracking me until I was safely back behind the desk. The sensation was like ice water in my veins. Around 1 a.m., boredom drove me to check the reservation system on my computer. That's when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I pulled up the occupied room list and saw that room 214 showed as vacant. I muttered under my breath and double-checked, certain I'd made an error since I'd literally checked him in just an hour earlier. I searched the check-in logs. Nothing. No name, no record, nothing. Then I accessed the transaction screen to verify his card payment had processed, and it showed no payments for the entire night. I distinctly remembered swiping his card and hearing the approval beep, but the system had no record of any transaction. My hands shaking slightly, I picked up the phone and dialed room 214. It rang 10 times with no answer. Then I checked the key card entry log, which records whenever someone uses their card to access their room. It showed nothing. No one had entered room 214 that night. That's when it hit me like a sledgehammer. He never went to his room after I gave him the key card. He'd walked toward the elevator, but apparently never actually gone upstairs. I looked over at the lounge area, and there he was, still sitting in that same position, staring at the blank television screen. An awful feeling settled in my chest like a weight. I sat there debating what to do, part of me thinking maybe the system had glitched, but the complete absence of any record, no payment, no entry log, no reservation, made it clear he wasn't actually checked in at all. I spent another 15 minutes just watching him, and he never moved, not once. Around 1:30, I walked over and asked if everything was okay, my voice barely steady. He turned his head toward me with that same blank expression and said he just couldn't sleep. Then he turned back to face the television. I nodded and returned to my desk, but my hands were trembling. Around 2 a.m., I noticed he wasn't in the lounge anymore. My stomach dropped immediately because I hadn't seen him leave. I scanned the lobby frantically, then spotted him standing at the end of the hallway by the restrooms, half hidden in shadows. He was just standing, perfectly still, like a statue. I kept glancing up at him while pretending to work on the computer. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, then slowly walked back to the lounge and sat down as if nothing had happened. The casual way he moved, like this was all perfectly normal, terrified me more than anything else. I called my manager at home and explained the situation. She sounded groggy and told me to keep an eye on him and call police if he did anything threatening. After hanging up, I thought that his very presence already felt threatening, but I didn't know what else to do. I decided to check the security cameras. The footage showed him walking down the first floor hallway, stopping at the end, standing motionless for several minutes, then walking back. Later, he entered the stairwell and remained there for about 10 minutes. I had no idea what he was doing in there, but it couldn't be good. Every time I looked up from the computer, he was somewhere different, near the vending machines, by the elevators, once just standing in a corner where the lighting was poor. He was always staring, always watching. His eyes seemed to track my every movement with predatory focus. By 3:30, I couldn't take it anymore. I called the non-emergency police line and explained that there was a man in the hotel who I didn't believe was actually a guest. They said they'd send someone over. While waiting, I noticed he'd moved again, this time much closer to the reception desk. He was standing maybe 15 feet away, just watching me with that unsettling stare. He didn't blink much, and he definitely didn't speak. He just stood there with this staring problem that my skin felt like it was crawling with insects. I pretended to type on the computer, but I was so scared I could barely breathe properly. Around 3:50, the door buzzer went off. I thought it might be the police, but it was just another guest returning late. I quickly let him in, and the strange man turned his head to watch this guest walk across the lobby. I noticed his eyes following the guest's every step, studying him like he was cataloging information. That observation scared me even more because it suggested he was planning something. A few minutes later, the man disappeared again. I immediately checked the cameras and saw him standing outside one of the guest rooms on the first floor. He was literally just standing there, motionless, facing the door. That's when I called 911 directly. I told them he was outside a guest's room and I didn't know what he was planning to do. They assured me officers were en route. I kept my eyes glued to the camera feed, watching him stand at that door for about 3 minutes before slowly walking back toward the lobby. When he returned, he walked right up to the reception desk and leaned over the counter. He looked directly at me and asked if there was any food available. His voice was so low and disturbing that it made my throat constrict. I told him about the vending machines in the corner. He gave me this small smile that didn't reach his eyes, then walked away. I sat there staring at the clock, desperately willing the police to arrive. Finally, around 4:10 a.m., 2 officers showed up. I let them in and immediately pointed toward him. He was back in the lounge, sitting down like nothing had happened. They approached and spoke with him for several minutes, asking for identification and questioning him that I couldn't hear from my position. Then they escorted him out. One officer returned and explained that the man wasn't a guest at all. The credit card he'd given me was stolen, and he had no luggage or legitimate reservation. He'd been pretending to be a guest to gain access to the building. They charged him with trespassing and credit card fraud. After they left, I sat there shaking until my shift ended. Every time I glanced at the security cameras, I expected to see him again, lurking in some corner. The part that disturbed me most was realizing he'd been inside the hotel for hours, wandering around, standing outside guest rooms, and watching me from different vantage points. He was never supposed to be there at all. I have no idea what his ultimate plan was, but I know with absolute certainty it wasn't good. The memory of those hours of being watched, studied, stalked within what should have been a safe, controlled environment still haunts me. That was the most terrifying night of my entire life, and I'll never forget the way he looked at me, like he was planning something unspeakable. My name is Sarah. I'm 24, and I work the night shift at a tiny gas station off County Road 11. It's the kind of place most people don't notice unless they're desperate for fuel or completely lost. I took this job because it was quiet and predictable, or at least I thought it was. The station sits alone on a stretch of empty road, surrounded by nothing but darkness for miles in every direction. During my shift, which runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I might see 5 customers on a busy night. Most of the time, it's just me, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and the occasional truck rumbling past on the highway. It started on a Thursday night around 1 a.m. The air outside was thick and still, and the constant buzz of the overhead lights had been grating on my nerves all evening. I was about to heat up a cinnamon roll I didn't really want when the door chimed. A man walked in, mid-40s, maybe older, wearing a faded green jacket with messy hair and dry, cracked lips, like he hadn't smiled in years. But what struck me most was how he moved. He didn't head for the coffee or snacks like normal customers. Instead, he positioned himself near the counter and stared at me with this strange familiarity, like he recognized me from somewhere. "Hi," I said, forcing what I hoped was a polite smile. "You always work this late?" he said. It wasn't a question. I blanked, taken aback. Yeah, mostly." He smiled then, but it didn't reach his eyes. I figured. I've passed through a few times, noticed it's always you. That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Oh, right, small town, I guess. He didn't leave. Instead, he said, "Meredith, right?" I froze. I wasn't wearing a name tag that night, and I was certain I'd never met this man before. I was about to ask how he knew my name when he continued. "You have nice handwriting," he said, motioning toward the small whiteboard where I'd written "cinnamon coffee is back" in marker. "Most people dot their I's with circles. You use little slashes, very specific, thoughtful." I didn't respond. The observation was too detailed, too intimate for a casual customer to make. He didn't buy anything, just stood there for another minute, studying my reactions like I was some kind of specimen. Then he nodded. "I'm Paul," he said. "Just curious, that's all." Then he walked out into the night, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and questions I couldn't answer. After that night, Paul started showing up randomly. Not every shift, that would have been too obvious, but often enough that I stopped believing it was coincidence. Sometimes he'd come inside and buy something small, lingering far longer than necessary. Other times, I'd notice his car parked at the edge of the lot with the headlights off, just sitting there in the darkness. One night, I tried to ignore him completely. He came in, bought a bottle of water, and lingered like always, but I kept my eyes focused on my phone, pretending to be busy. "You're quieter tonight," he observed. "Long shift," I muttered, not looking up. He slowly looked around the store like he was taking inventory of everything. The security cameras, the emergency exits, the layout of the aisles. "It must get lonely," he said conversationally. "Just you out here in the dark, no one else for miles." "I'm fine," I replied curtly. He leaned against the counter, bringing himself closer to where I stood. "You ever get scared, being a woman alone at night like this?" His voice wasn't threatening, which somehow made it worse. It was curious, neutral, like he was asking about the weather or commenting on gas prices. The casual tone made the question feel predatory. I stepped back and asked, "Do you need anything else?" He tilted his head, studying me. "You always keep the door to the back room locked. Smart choice. I noticed you check it around 2 a.m. almost every night." My stomach turned to ice. How could he possibly know my routine that specifically? I didn't answer, couldn't find words. "I'll let you get back to it," he said, with a soft, almost apologetic smile. "Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Then he walked out again, leaving me shaking. After that encounter, everything changed. I started walking to my car with keys between my fingers. I kept a tire iron under the counter within easy reach. I changed the curtains in my apartment and started showering with the bathroom door locked, even when I was completely alone. The paranoia seeped into every aspect of my life. There were nights Paul didn't appear, sometimes going a full week without showing up, but that didn't provide relief. It actually made things worse, because I never knew when he'd reappear, when I'd look up from restocking shelves to find him watching me through the window. The worst incident happened after I'd gone a week without seeing him. I'd started to relax, thinking maybe he'd lost interest or moved on to someone else. I took my usual 10-minute break to use the restroom and grab a snack from the back. When I returned to the counter, there was a Polaroid photograph lying there. It was a picture of me refilling the windshield washer fluid at the pump station behind the building. The photo had been taken that same night, and it was shot from close range, much too close for comfort. There was no note with it, but someone had used red ink to circle the slash-style dot I'd made over the eye in windshield on the pump label. My hands shook as I held the photograph. He'd been watching me, following me, documenting my activities without my knowledge. The level of obsession it represented made me physically sick. The next time Paul came in, I was ready. I told him to leave immediately, or I'd call the police. "I get it," he said calmly, seemingly unfazed by my threat. "You've been too forward." "I've been following you," I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to sound strong. "I just think you're the kind of person who's used to being misunderstood," he replied. "I thought maybe you'd appreciate someone who pays attention." "That's not paying attention," I shot back. "That's obsession." He didn't flinch at the accusation. Would it be easier if I wore a big smile and brought a soda every night? Would I seem more normal if I talked about sports and pretended I didn't notice the way your shoes are always a half size too big? Or how your left eyelid twitches when you're tired? The specific observations terrified me. I was already dialing 911 with trembling fingers. He didn't try to stop me or leave. He just stood there with his arms at his sides, waiting. When the police arrived, he didn't resist arrest. He stood perfectly still, cooperative and calm, as if this outcome had been inevitable. They searched his car and found a spiral notepad filled with dates, times, and detailed observations. It contained my work schedule, notes about my habits, descriptions of my clothing, even records of what I'd eaten during breaks. One page was just my name written over and over again in increasingly tight loops until the letters became indecipherable scribbles. Throughout the arrest, he kept telling the officers the same thing. "I just notice things. I'm observant. That's not a crime." The restraining order was processed within a week. I don't work night shifts anymore, and I don't even live in the same town. The company transferred me to another station 2 hours away, but even now, months later, when I see headlights behind me for too long while driving, I feel that familiar tingle at the back of my neck. Sometimes I still think about the way he said my name that first night, like he'd already practiced it, like he'd been rolling it around in his mouth, savoring it. That memory, more than anything else, reminds me how close I came to something much worse than just being watched. My name is Marcus. I'm 29, and I work the overnight shift at a small rural motel. It's not part of any chain, just a family-owned place with 2 floors and maybe 25 rooms total. I work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the motel rarely gets much traffic during those hours. Maybe a couple of late check-ins if someone's traveling through, but most nights, it's dead quiet. That's exactly why I took this job. I'm not particularly social, so sitting in an empty building most nights suits my personality perfectly. The setup works well for someone like me. There's a main office with the front desk, some chairs, a coffee machine, and a rack of local brochures. Behind the desk, a hallway leads to a back office that's set up like a lounge with another desk, a couch, mini fridge, and wall-mounted television. The convenient thing about the back office is there's a speaker system that dings whenever someone rings the service bell at the front desk. So normally, I just relax in the back room, watch something on my laptop, maybe catch a nap on the couch, and when I hear the bell, I get up and walk to the front to help whoever needs assistance. I've worked there long enough to know the building's normal rhythm. The structure creaks and settles sometimes, the heating system makes clicking noises, and the front door buzzes when guests use their key cards after hours. These are all familiar sounds that I've learned to tune out. But working night shifts has a way of making even normal sounds feel sinister if you think about them too much. And sometimes, the things that seem normal at first turn out to be anything but. This happened on a Tuesday night in late fall. The temperature outside had dropped into the 40s, and the parking lot was nearly empty except for 4 or 5 cars belonging to guests. Around 2 a.m., I was settling into the back office couch when I heard the service bell ring. I stood up and walked into the main office, expecting to find someone at the desk needing assistance. But when I got there, the lobby was completely empty. I looked through the glass doors toward the road, but everything was dark and still. No cars approaching, no headlights, nothing. I figured maybe I'd imagined it, though the bell is loud and clear, so I knew that wasn't the case. I stood there for a minute, waiting to see if anyone would come in, but no one did. So I returned to the lounge. I sat back down on the couch and pulled out my phone to scroll through social media. Less than 10 minutes later, the bell rang again. I jumped up and hurried into the main office, but once again, it was empty. The hair on the back of my neck stood up this time. I walked outside and checked the parking lot. All the cars were parked with their lights off, and there was no movement anywhere. The road stretched empty in both directions. I walked to the edge of the sidewalk and looked around carefully, but there wasn't a single sign of life anywhere. I went back inside and decided to sit behind the front desk instead of returning to the back room. I figured maybe some drunk person was playing pranks, a ding and dash kind of thing. Maybe one of the guests' kids thought it was funny. But after sitting there for 15 minutes with nothing happening, I started to relax. I leaned back in the chair, opened my laptop, and figured it was just one of those weird occurrences I'd laugh about later. That's when the bell rang again. I snapped my head up so fast it hurt my neck. The lobby was still empty, nobody visible anywhere. My skin began to crawl with unease. I stood up and walked completely around the front desk to make sure nobody was hiding, but found no one. I checked the lobby restrooms thoroughly. I even stepped outside again and searched with my phone's flashlight, but everything was dead quiet. I went back inside and decided to try a different approach. Instead of returning to the lounge, I sat down in the chair directly behind the front desk. If someone was sneaking around and ringing the bell to mess with me, I wanted to be positioned to catch them in the act. I dimmed the lobby light slightly so the room was darker, and I sat there listening intently. The silence was so complete that every small sound made me twitch. The wall clock's ticking seemed unnaturally loud. The mini fridge in the back office hum and click. Every few minutes, the building would creak as it settled for the night. I sat with my arms crossed, staring directly at the service bell on the counter. 15 minutes passed, then 20. My eyes started getting heavy, and I thought maybe whoever was doing this had given up. I even started wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Just as I was beginning to relax and doze off, it happened again. The bell rang, but this time I saw exactly what was causing it. A pale hand emerged from underneath the front desk, reaching up over the counter and pressing the bell directly in front of me. I shot up from the chair so fast I'm sure it almost toppled over, and I bolted down the hallway into the back office. I slammed the door and locked it, then stood there in darkness with my chest pounding. My mind raced, trying to comprehend how someone could be hiding under the desk. There isn't much space underneath, but there's enough room for someone to crouch if they squeeze themselves in tight. That meant they'd been hiding just a few feet away from me the entire time, waiting. I forced myself to look at the security monitors. There were 4 cameras, one covering the lobby, one on the hallway, and 2 monitoring the parking lot. On the lobby feed, I could see the chair had indeed fallen over in my hasty retreat. The counter area looked empty. Then, in the bottom corner of the frame, I saw movement. A head poked out from behind the desk. I couldn't make out facial features, just the outline and what looked like eyes staring directly into the camera lens. I backed away from the monitor, unable to keep watching. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone had broken into the building and was hiding in the lobby. She told me to stay where I was and that officers were on their way. While on the phone, I couldn't help but watch the monitor. The person's head disappeared from view, and then I saw them crawl out from behind the desk on hands and knees. They crawled to the entrance doors, then stood up. The figure was tall, wearing a hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled tight, and their posture was unnaturally hunched. Then they turned around and began walking around the lobby like they were searching for something specific. After a moment, they turned and walked out of the camera's range toward the hallway that led to the back office where I was hiding. I pressed my back against the locked door. A moment later, the doorknob rattled. Just once, a very slow, deliberate rattle. Then silence. The dispatcher kept asking if I was safe, but I couldn't answer for several seconds because my throat felt like it was closing up. After what felt like an eternity, I heard slow footsteps moving away from the door. I rushed back to the monitor and saw the intruder pacing around the lobby again. At one point, they stood directly in front of the glass entrance doors and stared outside like they were waiting for someone or something. Then they walked over to the brochure rack and started flipping through the papers as if they were casually killing time. Minutes dragged by like hours. Finally, I saw flashing blue and red lights through the parking lot cameras. 2 police cars pulled up. The intruder must have seen the lights too, because they suddenly bolted out of the camera frame. A second later, I heard the front doors burst open as the officers entered. When they finished clearing the building, they found a large rock near the front entrance that had presumably been used to prop the door open. But they didn't find the intruder inside. Whoever it was had vanished. They searched the entire parking lot, checked the road in both directions, and one officer told me that whoever it was must have slipped away as soon as they saw the patrol cars approaching. But they took the incident seriously and filed a complete report. I kept replaying it in my mind afterward. The way that pale hand had calmly emerged from under the desk and pressed the bell like it was the most natural thing in the world. The casual, almost playful nature of it made the whole experience even more disturbing. Now, every time I hear that service bell ring at night, I think of that hand and that night. I don't think I'll ever be able to look at that front desk the same way again, knowing someone was hiding underneath it, watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. The violation of safety I felt that night changed something fundamental about how I view my workplace and my own security.